She, the infinite, wants to talk to you. I just want to get that. Wants to talk to you. As one friend has conversation with another friend. That's how you talk to the infinite. You talk to the infinite conversationally. Does everyone get that? There's a unique conversation for which I was born and you were born. And I talk to the infinite conversationally with that sense of immediacy and that sense of authenticity. And in that conversation, nothing's off the table. So the infinite can meet the intimate. We just send out this little note, on conversation. And in conversations, what I want to talk about today, right? Because the reason we founded One Mountain, right? The reason we founded One Mountain was to have evolutionary conversations. My friend Sally Kempton is Swami Durgananda, a great teacher. She'd always say about herself, "I'm a criminal." So what we mean by crime, Becca, is we mean the sacred spark of boundary breaking, right? We have to have boundary breaking conversations. And by boundary breaking conversations, I mean conversations that break the boundary of politeness and civility, although we should always be civil and always be polite. But that shouldn't be the goal of the conversation. The goal of the conversation should be something else. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the kind of the nature of the conversation we're trying to have here at One Mountain. We convene One Mountain to have evolutionary conversations. And, beloved Barbara Marx Hubbard was about nothing if she wasn't about evolutionary conversations. So I want to talk about what that means. What's an evolutionary conversation? And what is a conversation? And what is evolution? And what is the evolution of conversation, right? And why is the evolution of conversation actually the evolution of love and the very purpose of all of reality? Okay, so that's big. Okay, so we ready to go? So I want to try and kind of step in here and actually have, enough time, to try and unpack this. So let's try and go slow. So let me try and tell you how we got here a little bit, okay? How we got here. So we're finishing, and we're gonna be kind of looking forward in about 2 minutes to kind of the relaxed, easy opening, right, of today's One Mountain, because we're gonna go kind of like deep in, and we're gonna start flying in a couple of minutes, but I want to try and get there slowly and carefully. Okay. So we're trying to complete a great library. We're actually in the middle of writing a great library of culture. And we're writing a great library because we experience ourselves in a very, very real way, right? In this time between worlds and this time between stories, in which you can literally feel in your body the falling apart. And when we first started One Mountain, 401 weeks ago, that falling apart was deep in my body. I could feel it deep in my body. I could feel it in 2009 and 10 and 11. When I first started talking about what we called then, the breaking down, the breaking apart, the falling apart. And then we started deploying the term the second shock of existence, right? The first shock of existence being the death of the individual human being, and the potential second shock of existence being the potential death of humanity. So you remember, Shahat, back in 2009, right? I gave a series of talks at Vanwouty, right, introducing Unique Self, right, and why we need Unique Self in this new story, which answers the question of who am I, right? 2009, 10, 11, something like that, right? in order to respond to this breaking down. And actually, one of the teachers at Manwauti, Malk, wrote a book called, something like, the second shock of existence, or your unique self in response to the second shock of existence, or remember Enoch, something like that, right? And I think I wrote an introduction to that book. And what Malk understood correctly was that unique self, and that this whole teaching was a response to the second shock of existence. And he got that right. And that everything we were trying to do was shifting. So instead of kind of teaching Dharma, doing kind of the Enlightenment teacher thing or the cultural philosopher thing, let's teach Dharma, let's kind of share tradition, let's be, spiritual artists, right? And paint the canvas of gnosis, of knowing in our bodies, and engage in our stories of personal and even social transformation, right? In some sense, around 2010, 11, that all kind of disappeared for me. And I realized that the only response to this second shock of existence, to the potential death of our humanity, is to actually tell a new story, and to tell a new story of value. And that it's only a new story of value of the kind that Marcello Ficinio and Plethon, right, his teacher Plethon, and those who gather in the Florentine Platonic Academy in the Renaissance, that new story of value that birthed modernity, that only that kind of new story of value could actually change the game. That's kind of how we got here. Does that make sense, everybody? Does that make sense? Everyone, is this? I just want to kind of find us. So, and then we realized that we can't do that new story of value like in a book. Like, let's write a book that tells the story, because it doesn't have the gravitas, it doesn't have the weight, it doesn't have that we actually need to do what they did in the Renaissance at that time between world and that time between stories. And we need to write a great library. If there's not one painting of, right, name your painter of the Renaissance, there's an entire thing called Renaissance art, right? And although there's many different schools, and Elena, right, talked about art and its different periods and its unfoldings, right, in a talk she gave a number of weeks ago here in One Mountain, right, there's the sense of Renaissance art. So we need a new Renaissance. We need a new story of value, and not just mystically. We need it politically, economically, culturally. What does Marx do? Marx tells a new story, right? And to the extent that Marx's story was good, some of its plot lines got adopted around the world. And to the extent that plot line missed essential dimensions, right, it generated, directly or indirectly, communism, which has brutally killed more people than any other system in the world, right? And of course, communism had available to it weapons of destruction that the great religions didn't. So communism and National Socialism, two secular ideologies, right, of the 20th century, managed to kill more people than obviously all of the religions together. So we realize, okay, we have to tell a new story of value, right? After all of the great postmodern deconstruction, we need this great reconstructive project. So we're doing this great library. And the great library is going to have many, many, many volumes. And each volume is going to find its own readership. It's going to find its own way. So, and I'm just going to trying to kind of take you into how we got here. So we're finishing 2 volumes now that Paul worked on, and Cal worked on, and Clint Fuse worked on, and Kirsten worked on. I had the privilege of being the first writer of them. And then they went to Lena, who kind of, absorbed them, swallowed them whole, and then kind of did a lot of re-artisting and reconstructing and kind of rearranging, right? And we're about to put those 2 volumes out. And by the way, everyone's contribution was essential. Without Kirsten's awesome work, we couldn't have done it. Without Paul and Carol, without Dr. Clint Fuse. I mean, they're gorgeous volumes. And one's called Evolution, one's called Wholemate, the Relationship for the Future. And the other's called The Evolution of Love, the Rise of Evolutionary Relationships, or some such. So Elena sent me some homework about a week ago, and the homework was, okay, I had mentioned to her that I need to write a little bit more about this idea of conversation. And this idea that I want to call the conversational cosmos. Okay. And that was kind of holding up the second volume. And so the last 3-4 days, I've tried to enter into this notion of the conversational cosmos. And I just sent Elena last night kind of a, I don't know, a 14, 15,000 word kind of standalone essay, which will be also integrated in some particular way into the book. And Elena might add a dimension to about linguistics, right? Because linguistics and conversation are really important, about the conversational cosmos. So first of all, I just told you the story of how we got here, right? Just like so that I'm not talking at you, that we're kind of with each other together in this. So now that you kind of know how we got here, so let's try and go someplace. Okay, the conversational cosmos. So let's see if we can go 20 steps. Step one. It's not that conversations matter. It's that conversations are everything. Did you get the difference between that? It's not that conversations matter. Conversations are everything. And when I say conversations are everything, what I mean is that the basic unit of human life is conversation. Life, human life, is a series of conversations. So if you want to strip aside all of the sounds and furies of human life, at its core, underneath everything, is conversation. Or another way of saying the same thing, this is number one, another way of saying the same thing is that life is a series of conversations. Now, that's a very big realization. Life is a series of conversations, which means that if you want to understand life, life is a conversation. That is the essential, to borrow a term from Leibniz, the essential monadic reality. The monad of life is conversation. If I can borrow a different term that was in fashion before Einstein, and now is coming, appropriately back into fashion. And Einstein actually, in a speech in 1919 in Leiden, pointed out that he didn't mean to dismiss it. He just said that relativity didn't require it, right? Which is the ether, E-T-H-E-R, the ether. And the ether is the substrate of reality, the ground of reality in which all arises. So the ground of reality is conversation. So this is point two. The conversational ground of reality is what sources what emerges reality. So reality is not just awareness. Okay, so if you look at Eastern thought, which tells us reality is awareness, reality is not just awareness. Reality is more than awareness. Reality is an aesthetic of conversation, or said differently, reality is allurement. Reality is allurement. It's attraction and allurement in relationship to autonomy, but always, there's never not allurement. There's always allurement. And allurement is always the allurement to conversation. Okay, that's number two. And we're gonna kind of go step at a time. Let's go deeper into this. Let's go deeper into this. Let's see if we can get even deeper here. So three, so we're saying not only is human life a series of conversations, we're saying conversation is the structure of reality, and it's a conversational cosmos all the way down the evolutionary chain and all the way up the evolutionary chain. And I've been thinking about a conversational cosmos for about 20 years. And I first started talking about it in those terms in 2002 and 3, when I met a man named Doug Stone. Maybe it was 2000, something like that, 2001, 2, 3. And I had given I had participated with a dear friend, student of mine, colleague at the time, who was a lecturer at Harvard Law School. And she wanted to take some of the key ideas and the wisdom of the lineage of Solomon and apply them to the Harvard negotiation project, which was about how you do negotiation. And the head of the project was a gentleman named Roger Fisher, and who had written a book with Bill Urey called Getting to Yes. And so something was opened that I was delighted to support its emergence in a kind of mentor role, which was called the Harvard, I think it was called then the Harvard Negotiation Insight Initiative, or some such. And it opened with a dialogue between myself and Bill Urey at Harvard Law School. And out of that came a conversation with someone named Doug Stone. And Doug had written a book called Difficult Conversations, which was kind of the follow-up book to Roger Fisher and Bill Urey's book, Getting to Yes. And what both books were about conversation. So Getting to Yes was, how do you get to a yes in a conversation? And instead of using the word conversation, they used the word negotiation. So there was a whole negotiation literature, that emerged. And then the negotiation literature became the conversation literature. And there was a book called, Difficult Conversations, and around the same time, another book called Crucial Conversations. And there was the beginning of this realization that as Roger Fisher liked to say, it's about how you negotiate. And so I met with some of these folks, and I tried to say to them that the literature was too thin. Do you get what I mean by thin, friends? Is it okay that I'm telling you the story about kind of how we got here and why this matters? Is it okay? You guys with us? You okay in the story? Everyone with me? We good? We good here? Everybody just give me a check in here that we're good, so I can kind of feel, we can feel each other. Okay, this is a whole new world we're in here. So I want to kind of take you in kind of intimately and not, kind of talk at, but just kind of just share together. Okay. So I said to Doug when we met and to Bill, that the literature was too thin. It was too pragmatic. It was too mechanical. And that we need to realize something deeper, that it's not that negotiation, which then became conversation, meaning the literature began as negotiation literature, and then it became conversation literature. It's not that conversation is this technical, mechanical, strategic process, but that actually conversation is the structure of reality. It's a conversational cosmos, right, at its very core, right? And that therefore, knowing how to have a conversation is everything. And the goal of reality is the evolution of conversation. So for example, in the Hebrew wisdom literature, there are some hidden passages which occur in the both Aramaic literature and in the later Hasidic literature that Martin Buber talked about, which interpret the word Messiah. Messiah. And Messiah is the Messiah, meaning what we call in our conversation here, Homo Amor. And I've talked a lot over the years about how the notion of Homo Amor, or the emergence of a new human and a new humanity in response to the meta crisis, this potential not becoming a transhumanist. This is not transhumanism. This is the opposite of transhumanism. This is the emergence of a deeper humanity, right? Transhumanism says, let's go from carbon to silicon. Let's leave, in various ways, humanity behind. This is not transhumanism. Homo Amor is the deepening of our humanity. In other words, the response to the death of our humanity, the only potential true response to the death of our humanity, has to be the deepening of our humanity. Does that make sense? As the opposite of the holy is the superficial. The superficial leads to the falling apart. to the breaking apart, right, to existential risk, to the meta crisis, right, to the second shock of existence, to the potential death of humanity, the end of humanity, it falls apart, or the death of our humanity, right? And one of the expressions of a potential death of our humanity, which suggests that the human being is no longer going to operate, right, out of this deep sense of shared heart, this deep sense of free will, this deep sense of the drama of decision making, and the deep sense of freedom, the deep sense of Eros and love being a true reality of cosmos and not a social construct, right? There's this transhumanist vision, right, which people like B.F. Skinner, the psychologist at Harvard, held very strongly. It was actually B.F. Skinner was the behaviorist psychologist who reigned at Harvard for 6 decades, was an early transhumanist. And the MIT Media Lab, right, is dominated by applications of Skinner's thought to the design of the internet, which is this transhuman vision, which actually says that old vision of the human being as being this sacred, free, infinitely dignified, divine, unique expression of the field of infinite value is actually not true. That's transhumanism. So the response to transhumanism in its various forms, which leads to the death of humanity or the death of our humanity, is a deeper vision of humanity. Right? A deeper vision. The deeper vision of humanity is Homo Amor, a new human, a new humanity. We go from Homo sapien to Homo Amor, and we've described Homo Amor in many different conversations in One Mountain. So Homo Amor is not different than the early great lineages who talked about Messiah. But in the early great lineages, including the Hebrew lineage that talked about Messiah, and obviously the Christian lineage and the Islamic lineages, and there's different versions of Messiah also in, right, Buddhism and also in Kashmir Shaivism and also in Confucianism. There's different versions of this ideal, this new human ideal emerging. But Messiah there was either hijacked ethnocentrically, as we own Messiah. Each religion said we own Messiah, right? And or it was limited to one human being owned by one religion. And we're saying, no. Messiah is not an ethnocentric triumph of a particular religion, and it's not one human being becoming, this new dramatic, gorgeous expression. No, Messiah is the democratization of human greatness, which is the realization of the new human and the new humanity. That's Homo Amor. Now, what Homo Amor does is Homo Amor becomes the intimate universe in person. Homo Amor becomes Eros in person. Homo Amor becomes the universe, a love story in person. Homo Amor becomes the Amorous Cosmos in person. And the Amorous Cosmos is the conversational cosmos. So what Homo Amor knows how to do better than anything else is how to have a conversation. And Homo Amor, who becomes the universal love story in person, who becomes infinite value in person, who becomes a unique incarnation of the field of value, capacitates new possibilities of conversation. So evolution becomes the evolution of conversation. The ultimate value is the capacity to have a conversation. Anti-value destroys conversation. Does everyone get that? And the nature of anti-value is the destruction of conversation. So as you see, let's say, Baudrillard, right? It was a name I can never pronounce, B-A-U-D, someone pronounced R-I-L-L-A-R-D, talks about the simulacrum, where he talks about, and there's this French writer that the Wachowski brothers, when they made The Matrix, had everyone read him, because The Matrix was, right, a kind of simulation, and the nature of the simulation was to create a reality which wasn't real, and in which conversation actually was never aligned with reality. You can never talk about what was real, right? Because what was real couldn't be talked about. And there were no conversations that was real. Everything was simulated. So that destruction of conversation is core to the meta crisis and core to the anti-value that drives the meta crisis. So, for example, polarization. Polarization is at the very, very core of the meta crisis. Polarization means there's no conversation happening. Did everyone get that? Polarization means there's no conversation. We can't have a conversation. Conversation means I can move from polarization to paradox. Okay? Now, the word Messiah that I introduced, the word Messiah in the hidden texts of the literature, Messiah means ma-siach. Siach means conversation. So Messiah, Homo Amor, is the capacity to have a conversation. So the emergence of a new field of value and a new human and a new humanity is the capacitation, we capacitate, right, a new possibility to have conversation. Anti-value is polarization. Polarization means at its core that a conversation can't happen. Right? There can't be a conversation. You can't have a conversation. So I want to try and understand this, and it's crazy deep. And I think you're all probably feeling, I certainly am, that I'm trying to enter this kind of very, very slowly and try and get to kind of the core of it and not get lost. So let me try and kind of unpack a few steps now. Okay, so step I don't know what step we're on, but let's call it step 4 just to arbitrarily name a number. Okay, so here we go. So the move to conversation is the move from polarization to paradox. And paradox is different than contradiction. Contradiction is polarization, means a conversation can't happen. Okay? Paradox means it's not a contradiction. Why? Not because we've resolved the opposites, but because we've brought the opposites into conversation, which is the source of beauty. We say a beautiful conversation. Actually, conversation is what beauty is. And conversation, a real conversation, not a simulacrum, where there's all fake, feigned conversations, artificial conversations, but an authentic conversation is when the conversation holds the contradictions, but doesn't look away. So we stay with each other, and we have a genuine conversation. We don't look away. We go from polarization to paradox. So opposing ideas have a conversation. So instead of being pro-life and pro-choice, and we polarize on the abortion issue, pro-life or pro-choice, life and choice begin to have a conversation because they're both in the field of value together. So they're both expressions of this deeper ground of conversation, because conversation is Eros, which is value. Right? Value is conversation. Now stay close with me, okay? It's deep, and it's going to go. We're done with the easy listening. Let's go deep. So the word for value in the original Hebrew is erech, E-R-E-C-H, erech. The code of law in the Wisdom of Solomon lineage is called Shulchan Aruch, which means a set table. And a set table means where everything's in the right place. Now, Aruch, Shulchan Aruch means a set table, right? The word Aruch, set, meaning everything in its right place, is actually an original Semitic word, Hebrew word, which means things that are in right relationship. So the word for value, stay very close to me, erech, value, E-R-E-C-H, value. The word value also means right relationship between things, or things that are in right conversation. Okay? Conversation means you have oppositional moments that are talking to each other. They're in right relationship. They're in right conversation. And so therefore they generate value. So value is, and this is so deep, it's so beautiful. Value is never one idea or one thing. Does everyone get that? Value is not one thing, one idea, one position, one ideology, one claim, right? One argument. No, value is value itself. The word erech, value, is not life or choice or any one value. Value itself means or emerges from the conversation between opposites that doesn't mire itself in contradiction, but moves from contradiction to paradox. Does everyone get that? Are we beginning to get something here? That's what value means. So value means polarized opposites that were contradictory and are now paradoxical, which is why we always say that the Garden of Eden, paradise, is paradox. It's not paradise, it's paradox. Right? Paradox is paradise. Right? The Garden of Eden means, can opposites be in a relationship which is paradoxical, in which no one turns away from the conversation? Okay, so that's like crazy deep. It's a conversational cosmos. So see if we can go even deeper into this. Okay. We have an Eros equation. Okay. We have an Eros equation. The Eros equation is, and the Eros equation is a description of reality. Okay. So reality is Eros. That's one of the keys of cosmoerotic humanism, this new story of value. What's Eros? Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness. Right? Aliveness, there's an aliveness, desiring ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. Now, that's just a formula read slightly differently to describe conversation. In other words, ever deeper contact means I'm not satisfied to be in a monologue. I can't just be in my own head. I need to get out of my head and out of my heart and out of my body and find your head and your heart and your body. I want to make contact. And contact is conversation. Right? And then when I make contact, conversation, I create communion. Communion happens through communication. Communication, when done well, is conversation. And then conversation creates ever greater wholeness. And wholeness means instead of having a contradiction which pulls apart and polarizes, right? The opposites or the parts, the different parts, don't fall apart. They don't cause existential risk. They don't cause breakdown, but the part realizes that it participates in a larger story. A particle, which is a small part, Latin, right? A particle participates in the larger whole, which is the field of value. And the field of value itself is constituted by different parts that are in right relationship. That's called erech. Erech means contextual right relationship between parts, and erech means value. So the field of value, the Garden of Eden, that is the field of paradise, which is paradox, because the parts always remain in conversation, right? So I have two students of mine, dear friends and students who are here now, who have been in a conversation for a few years. And at a certain moment, they had kind of a little bit, kind of turned away from a certain kind of conversation. And so, I was just, tenderly suggested, hey, maybe take a 20-hour drive together at some point a few months ago, and because you'll start talking again. Well, let's get back in conversation, but let's not try and have the conversation from a place of identity politics, where I'm defending my wounded identity. Let's just have a free, spacious, real conversation. And a real conversation can move from contradiction to paradox, where all of a sudden you don't need to resolve everything because you're in conversation. It by itself, right, is ecstatic, right? Conversation by itself is somehow ecstatic and allows us to create a synergy. So can we go deeper now for a second? Let's go even deeper. Okay, so what is a conversation? So sexing, for example, is understood by the lineage as a conversation. What happens in sexing? The upper lips and the upper lips speak together, which then create arousal, right? And then upper lips might meet lower lips, right? In other words, but the conversation is the movement of upper lips and lower lips, right? What does that mean? Right? And lips are connected to eros, to language, right? And lips are connected to tongue, which is called lashon, Lashon, and lashon is tongue, and lashon is language, right? Which is one of the sacred tools of conversation, language. So language is tongue, and language is so lashon is tongue, and lashon is language, and lips are upper and lower, and they create conversation, which is why sexing is called in the lineage conversation. Now, why? Because what conversation is the place where I come to my edge. Does that make sense, everyone? I come to the edge of me. And I realize at the edge of me, I'm not satisfied. That's what conversation means. At the edge of me, I'm not satisfied. I'm lonely at the edge of me. I'm at the edge of me, and at the edge of me, I'm not filled. At the edge of me, I meet my desire. And what is my desire at the edge of me? It's a desire for you. But it's a desire for you to be in conversation with you. The pornographic is sensation without conversation. Does that make sense, everyone? The pornographic is sensation without conversation. Art is the deepening of conversation. So if you look up, let's say, the pornographic, look for a definition online, virtually all the definitions online say the pornographic is explicit sexual images. It's not correct. The pornographic is explicit sexual images which are non-artistic or which are decontextualized from conversation. Because sex is a conversation, and a conversation has a plot line. And the pornographic, the plot lines are artificial. They're silly. There's no genuine plot line, meaning there's no genuine conversation. Right? And fuck me harder is not a conversation, just to be clear. Right? When it's decontextualized from life, from life's pain and life's beauty and life's potency and life's tragedy and life's post-tragic and life's tears and life's laughter. Right? It's a conversation. Right? So sensation without conversation is pornographic. Sensation with conversation, right, is erotic sexing. But now stay slow. Remember, there's 12 billion years of Eros before sex. So the sexual models the erotic. Does that make sense, everyone? The sexual models the erotic. And what is Eros? Eros is conversation. And as Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, protons, neutrons, and electrons moving towards contact, conversation. They actually talk to each other. And when they talk to each other, they realize, oh, we're separate, we're distinct. But actually, we also have a shared identity. We have a shared ground of value. So we can create an atom. And we recognize each other and we feel each other. And we're in a shared field of value. And now we can create shared purpose because we're talking to each other. So Eros, the Eros equation of cosmoerotic humanism in that book, First Principles and First Values, that Haley talked about in her beautiful Welcoming, right, which has the 18 interior or 17 interior science equations, right? So really, the Eros equation is really describing conversation. And the intimacy equation, intimacy equals shared identity in the context of otherness, right, is really about conversation, right? The desire to be intimate is the desire to be in conversation. And conversation means we have to recognize each other. We need mutuality of recognition. We need to feel each other, mutuality of feeling. We need to have a shared ground of value, which is why we're working so hard at the center to create a ground of value, to create a shared field of value, without which we only have polarization, which is anti-value. Anti-value is polarization. Anti-value is anti-eros. The anti-erotic destroys conversation. If we can't have conversation, we polarize. If we polarize, we have existential risk. So we need to create a shared field of value in order to restore conversation. And then we can get to the last dimension of the intimacy equation, which is shared purpose. Then we can have global coordination to respond to global challenges because we have global coherence, because we resonate with each other, because we're intimate with each other, because we're in conversation, which we can be because we have a shared ground of value. Does everyone begin to understand this? I mean, it's very beautiful. And I know I'm going, slowly, right? And just kind of I'm trying to kind of get this. It's very, very beautiful. The sexual models the erotic, which means the sexual is a conversation, and that conversation models all erotic conversation. You don't have erotic conversation by calling someone to talk to you in explicitly sexual words. That is not an erotic conversation. It might be if you have a depth of relationship, right? So if you have kind of boundary-breaking words in the context of profound commitment in a relationship, that might be an erotic conversation. But erotic conversation means it's a boundary-breaking conversation, meaning I break the boundary of superficiality. I enter into the depth. I deepen conversation, which deepens my humanity, because to be a human being is to be in conversation, or to be a human being is to be an incarnation of a new possibility of conversation. But reality is actually conversation all the way down and all the way up. It's a conversational cosmos. And conversation means an exchange of meaning in which we're responsive to each other, right? So protons, neutrons, and electrons exchange meaning. Three quarks exchange meaning, right? Configurations of intimacy in quarks, up quark and down quark, create variously protons or neutrons, right? And quarks have a values book which decides how they're going to respond to each other because they're having conversations. And all conversations are a conversation of value. Right? All conversations are conversations of value. There is no conversation that's not a conversation of value. All conversations about value. It's never about anything else. Right? That's what all conversations about. It's about all conversations are value conversations. But it's not a conversation about values. It's a value conversation. That's what a conversation is by its nature. So let's see if we can go deeper. Let's go deeper. Let's go let's go deeper, and it's beautiful. So let me ask a different question. Let me ask a different question, a different way to kind of talk about this, okay? And by the way, here's a parenthesis. Where's my friend Angus, right? We're going to have a conversation again about Israel because we need to have that conversation. We can't avoid that conversation. It's a critical conversation. We're going to have that conversation, right? We also need to have a conversation about the Ukraine, which Elaine is going to lead in a few weeks, right? So we're going to have a conversation about Gaza, which is absolutely critical, right? Gaza's on my heart day and night. I'm never not thinking about Gaza, and I'm never not thinking about the North, and I'm never not thinking about just the immensity of suffering in the world today, every place in the world, right? We have to talk about everything, and then we have to act from our conversation. But we're gonna have conversations. These conversations are critical. But let me see if I can evoke a somewhat different conversation now to kind of take us into a deeper understanding of what conversation is. Did that sentence make any sense, everybody? Okay, so here we go. Okay, you ready? Because I'm going to ask you a crazy question. Who's up for a crazy question? We up for a crazy question? Here we go. Okay. And I don't know about you, but I'm enjoying our conversation today because we're kind of finding our way. It's a new conversation. I'm just enjoying finding our way. So I don't know if you're enjoying this, but I am. Okay. So yay. So thank you. Thank you. So here's a question that Fichte and Schelling, love to ask. And it was also asked by Wittgenstein. And, the question is something like, why is there something rather than nothing? Isn't that a great conversation? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there something? Why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? Okay. It's a great question. It's a great way to start a conversation. You know, there's all these social etiquette books for kind of how to start a conversation at a party. I would suggest this. Just start there. Walk into a party and say, hey, my name's Jack. Why is there something rather than nothing? Right? Now, the Buddhist response, as someone wrote in the chat box, is who's asking? But with all due respect to Buddhism, right, that avoids, right, that's a classical Buddhist avoidance. Right? Actually, it's a good question. Right? Why is there something rather than nothing? Right? And Buddhism actually works to avoid the conversation. That's actually why Buddhism moves into silence. So Buddhism says it's all about silence. It's not exactly right. Right? Actually, reality is about silence out of which conversation needs to emerge. Does everyone get that? In other words, you need this depth of silence, and from the silence, the conversation emerges. So, for example, we've talked about this before in Hebrew lineage, in the what's called the story of the chariot, which is the kind of locus classicus of the lineage of Solomon's kind of erotic mysticism. There's a description of a kind of ecstatic medicine journey, if you will. And there's what's called the secret of Chashmal, Chashmal. The secret of Chashmal, and Chashmal is a particular color, but it also describes a particular phenomenological interior experience, right, Terry? I'm on a medicine journey, I'm having experiences, and the experience is called Chashmal. Chash is chash, the silence, right? Right? And it's the silence out of which, right, words emerge, right? Chashmal. Right? And Tal, you got to give me a chance to kind of unpack it. Okay. Right. So chashmal, right? Right. It's the silence. We've talked about this many times before, right? But it's very deep, right? Chash, deep silence. And listen in so we can pace together, be in the conversation, right? And then mal, the word emerges from the silence. Okay, so Buddhism spends too much time in the silence and actually doesn't get us where we need to go to the conversation. So, and often some of the Western religions spend lots of time in dogmatic arguments, right, which are bad conversations and never get to the silence, right? But you need actually silence that generates conversation. Okay, so now this is my suggested conversation starter at the next party you're at. Right? Why is there something rather than nothing? And there's basically two responses to that question. One is what a friend of mine called oops. It's the philosophy of oops. Well, why is there something? Oops. Uh-oh. Oops. Philosophy of oops. And the philosophy of oops is something like, just happened. Oops. And that is considered to be the sophisticated mainstream philosophy, right, of postmodernism, right, beginning in mid and late modernity. Oops. And it's quite an arrogant philosophy, I might say, because what it claims is that if you don't believe in oops, you're somehow infantile. There's something wrong with you. What's wrong with you? You don't believe in oops? This is the theology or the philosophy of oops. Why is there something rather than nothing? Oops. Now, oops has a lot of names, right? You can call it reductive materialism, or you can call it scientism, or you can call it logical positivism, or you can call it classical neo-Darwinism, right? Or you can call it, right? There's lots of names. There's lots of distressing disguises to oops, but oops has been quite successful. It's actually dominated the legacy cultures of most of the world, right? And most of the leading quote unquote intelligentsia in the world, right, actually, right, believes in oops. And they've managed to pull off this kind of enormous, right, sleight of hand, which is if you don't believe in oops, you're somehow regressive or infantile. Oops. Okay. There's a second philosophy, and the second philosophy can be summarized really very simply. And it's really that simple. There's only two choices. Oops, or the second philosophy is, why is there something rather than nothing? Because something's going on. Does that make sense, friends? Because something's going on. Right? And we're going to end today with a song about something's going on in a couple of minutes. Something's going on. Right? Something's going on. And forget about what's going on. And there's a lot of something's going on. There's a lot of names for that. You can call, David Bohm called it the implicate order. All right. The lineage of Solomon called it Adonaihu Elohim, and Kazimir Shivets called it Atman as Brahman, and other people called it Mat, and other people called it Geist, and other people called it Shunyata, right? I mean, there are a lot of names for the self-actualizing cosmos, the self-organizing universe, right? Right. Some people just called it nature, but they ascribed this kind of infinite potentiality to nature. But the idea was something's going on. Does everyone get that? Something's going on. So something's going on versus oops. Everyone get that so far? You with me? We okay? So now what's going on? What's going on? So what's going on is, now stay close. It gets like crazy and beautiful. What's going on is very hard to know. It's very easy to get into dogma. And so you got to really open the eye of the heart and the eye of the spirit and the eye of consciousness, right? And the eye of value to really understand what's going on. So, but whatever's going on, one thing's clear. What's clear? What's clear is that infinity desired intimacy. And I want you to, if you can, we're just going to go 3 more minutes, but let's try and stay crazy close here. Infinity desired intimacy, right? In other words, infinity wanted to have a conversation. Does everyone get that? There was a desire, right? There was an imperfection in reality, and the infinite wanted to talk. So reality exists because God wanted to talk. Does everyone get that? It's that simple, actually, though, right? Whatever that means, right? Whatever that means, okay? Right? Whatever that means, stay close, stay close, stay close, stay close, right? 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 It's like, right? The infinite desired intimacy. And intimacy means let's have a conversation. Right? And that's when you can't have a conversation anymore, right? There's no more intimacy. Does everyone feel that? Right? In other words, sometimes what happens in a relationship is more and more conversations are off the table. You can't talk about this, and you can't talk about that, and you can't talk about this unless you've got 10 stages of preparation, right? In order to kind of make sure to insulate against the potential slings and arrows, right? In other words, in most relationships, most real conversations are off the table. So relationships become non-intimate. An intimate relationship means there's no words that can't be spoken. Now, that means there's no conversation that can't be had. That doesn't mean that all conversations should be had at all times. That would be moral idiocy, obviously, right? You require a context, because we said erach is value, and erach is also right relationship between parts, right context, right time, right place. For everything, there's a time and place under the sun and over the sun. But essentially, right, even if you have them once a year, all conversations can be had, right? That's what it means to be intimate. So infinity desires intimacy means infinity wants to have a conversation, which is why the inception of reality is described by the lineage as, right, as wanting to talk, right? It's a conversation, right? God wants to talk, right? In other words, and its desire is always desire for a conversation. That's why we said sex is conversation, right? Right? Goddess wants to talk. She wants to talk. She wants to chat, right? She wants to flirt. Right? Ultimately, she wants to make love, the kind of erotic union with the divine, as a form of conversation. So now, stay close. So to have a conversation means that instead of having a contradiction, you have a paradox. So for example, how could the infinite possibly talk to finitude? In fact, how could there even be finitude? The infinite means that the infinite is everywhere in everything. So if the infinite's everywhere and everything, how can you have an other? You can't, because that's a contradiction, right? Until you understand that the infinite itself, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, there's no complete mathematical set. There's no closed set. It's an open set, right? So infinity is reaching. Infinity desires. What does infinity desire? Infinity wants to talk, wants to have a conversation. With who? With you, right? With you. That's why you exist, right? Infinity wants to talk to you. It's actually, I mean, it's shocking. That's called prophecy. Prophecy is a conversation in which infinity initiates and infinity evokes. Prayer is a conversation in which the human being initiates and the human being invokes. But both prophecy and prayer are a conversation, right? We turn to the divine to talk, which is different than sitting to meditate. It's infinitely more powerful. We need to meditate. Meditation has value, right? So there's a silence of presence. There's a ground of being, which we can access in the process of cultivating awareness. But meditation is placing our attention on awareness, right? Chant, prayer, prophecy is we're placing our attention on allurement, and allurement is the desire, and it's desire for conversation, for contact. That's what Eros is. Eros is the desire to make contact, which is the desire for conversation. Now, last piece. Conversation always means I'm at my edge, and I now desire to meet you at your edge. So where we exist is not an automatic separate self. It's not what Daniel Kahneman, who died recently, right, who wins the Nobel Prize for fast thinking, which he says is virtually all of the human being, not all of, but virtually all of fast thinking, which is automatic, unconscious, right, non-reflective, reflexive, habitual, right? He says that's most of what the human being is. And Alex Pentland, right, talks about that being, right, that which can be controlled in the human being, right, and organized, right, and manipulated, which is the word that he uses. No. That's not, the human being actually is reflective. The human being is free, right? The human being is profoundly feeling and uniquely feeling. And so I have this capacity, right, to actually have a unique conversation. Okay. I have a capacity to have a unique conversation where I'm at my edge. I'm not in my automatic. I'm not in my habitual, right? I'm not in my superficial, right? I'm not in my non-reflective. I'm not in my reflexive. I'm at my edge, and I'm naked before you. And I want to find you. And I'm open to your impact. And I want to feel you feeling me. And I want to feel me feeling you. And my desire at the edge is for us to have a conversation. And when the two cherubs, right, who are above the Ark of the Covenant and the Sanctum Sanctorum in the ancient Jerusalem Temple of Solomon, the two cherubs turn towards each other. They're face to face, and they're face to face. And then out of the space in between them, which is conversation, the space between the cherubs is conversation. Out of that space between the cherubs, which is conversation, emerges prophecy, prayer, or Dvar Adonai, the word of the divine. The word of the divine is conversation. And not that there's sacred conversation. All conversation is potentially sacred. And all of life is potentially sacred. And in the greatest revolution of Hasidism that Martin Buber talked about, this late expression of the wisdom of Solomon, is Hasidism broke the distinction between what they called Sichat Chulin, ordinary secular conversation, and Sichat Kodesh, and sacred conversation. And the master said there is no such thing. There's no such thing as that split. There's not secular conversation, right, and sacred conversation. All conversation is sacred conversation, right? Life is a series of conversations, and conversations means I bring opposites into conversations with each other. Does that make sense? So God, who's infinite or infinity, it's called an infinity, says, reality says, oh, the infinite's also intimate. So the infinite and the intimate are in conversation with each other. Does that make sense? So instead of infinity getting lost in an infinity of indifference, kind of an Aristotelian infinity of indifference, or intimacy getting lost in a kind of pagan, local, shamanic intimacy of impotence, which is often what they did, infinity and intimacy come together, and we have an infinite intimate who's infinitely potent and alively intimate in every moment, uniquely in conversation with you. I want to get that. What this all means is reality is conversation. And conversation is conversation with myself, intrasubjective. I'm talking to myself. It's conversation with you, intersubjective. I'm talking to you. It's conversation with reality, with she, with he, prophecy and prayer. But it's all conversation. And it's unique conversation. No conversation is the same. And so she, the infinite, wants to talk to you. I just want to get that. Wants to talk to you. And so there's a practice in the lineage of Solomon to go walk in the forest, and don't meditate. Talk to she. Walk in the forest and just talk. And in the language of one master, Nachman of Breslov, Kidabro ish el re'ehu, as one friend has conversation with another friend. That's how you talk to the infinite. You talk to the infinite conversationally. Does everyone get that? There's a unique conversation for which I was born and you were born. And I talk to the infinite conversationally with that sense of immediacy and that sense of authenticity. And in that conversation, nothing's off the table. So the infinite can meet the intimate. Free will can meet determinism. Life can meet choice, right? The individual can meet the community, right? In other words, all the things that are opposites, right, meet each other. In other words, yearning and fulfillment, beauty and ugliness, right? Body and spirit, laughter and serious, God and human, autonomy and communion, order and chaos, control and surrender, the hero and the villain, choice and no choice, wisdom and folly, uniqueness and sameness, anger and equanimity, calm, death and life, silence and speech, open and closed, success and failure, depression and joy, wave and particle, solid and fluid, intelligent and random, heresy and faith, power and powerless, certainty and uncertainty, purpose and no purpose, perfection and imperfection. All of them meet each other in conversation. Does everyone get that? The second you pick one and you split them, right, there's no conversation. And it's not yet, Talia writes, harmony and synthesis, not yet. No, it's in conversation. Harmony and synthesis is the end of the conversation. I want you to know that we want to get to the harmony and synthesis. No, paradox. Notice I didn't use the word harmony. I didn't use the word synthesis intentionally. No, it's paradox. I stay in the conversation even though I haven't gotten to synthesis. Does everyone get that? It's like, wow. I'm not in harmony. I have a dear friend that's, come to many teachings that I've been privileged to give since 2015. And we have a disagreement on kind of a vision forward, right? And, in the future, we may get to harmony, but we're not going to get to harmony now. We really have a different vision for lots of reasons, right? And we've done a great job of staying in the conversation. And I'm super proud of both of us, right? And not trying to resolve it in an immediate harmony or an immediate synthesis. Now, in the end, what we'll get to, and we'll finish here, right? In the end, we'll get to a synergy. We'll be able to synergize. In other words, paradox can bring me not to synthesis, but to synergy, meaning something comes together by staying together. And that's exactly what a relationship is. A relationship is we're not going to leave the conversation. And we're going to be respectful in the conversation. Respectful conversation matters. Doesn't mean to be abusive. There's no room for abuse in conversations. But we can bring our full passion, our full love, but it's always tender. It's never fierce without tender. Tender and fierce are never separate from each other. They're always in conversation. It's never hard without soft, right? It's never, outrageous without deep, profound, spacious calm. It's never being without becoming. In other words, truth is in paradox, and paradox means conversation. That's what it means. And we're now at this moment in society of polarization, which is anti-value. It's called in the lineage Sitra Achra. And Sitra Achra means the other side. The other side. It's an Aramaic word, S-I-T-R-A. Second word, A-C-H-R-A. Sitra Achra, the other side. The other side means there's no conversation. I've turned away. The other side. It's on the other side. There's no conversation. The conversation's over. I turn to the other side. There's no conversation. Does everyone get that? Stay in conversation. Doesn't matter if it gets hard. Don't turn away. Right? That's what it means, right? That's what I've promised to finish a couple of times. So let me fulfill the promise here. I would say the essence of demonization is the refusal to be in conversation, right? Right. I've experienced myself, right, a group of people for 25 years who most of them I don't know, I've never been in conversation with. A couple I haven't been in conversation with for a couple of decades. And fears arrested the conversation, normal fears. People got worried about finances or public status, whatever it was. But at some point, the conversation got cut off. There was shame because the conversation got cut off. It never went on, and it moved to demonization. We only demonize the one that we stopped talking to, right? Now, it's not that we just dialogue, but we have when we have a conversation, we're willing to be loved open by the other person. It's why sex is conversation. Okay? Now stay close. Stay close. Sex is conversation because I allow you to penetrate me. It doesn't matter whether you're the male or the female. That's irrelevant. Or there's two males or two females. That's not the point. The point is sexing involves a radical receiving and a radical penetration. And we've got to both be receiving and both be penetrating. That's what real conversation is. And then we synergize, but we've got to be willing to stay in. And sometimes not one conversation. And a great love means we've stayed in conversation and we've gotten to this gorgeous synergy, right, of a new wholeness, which is a new eros, which is a new possibility, which is a new intimacy, which is the move from polarization to potency, which is the move, right, from contradiction to paradox, which is paradise. That's Homo Amor. That's the new world, right? That's the new human, right? That's the new humanity. So I just want to thank everyone today for staying in conversation. And I know that the conversation started slow. And that's one of the things we need to do. We need to start slow. Let's start haltingly, right? I would say we started today haltingly. What do you get what I mean by halting? We were finding our way, right? We don't start with wow. Let's start with let's find our way. And I just want to just thank everyone from the bottom of my heart for staying in conversation. And what a joy it's been to be in conversation.